What if I told you that some of the biggest icons of old Hollywood were living a secret life the cameras never caught? Behind the tuxedos, the red carpets, and the studio romances, many of these stars carried a truth they could never share. The silver screen sold fairy tales, but off-screen, the real stories were braver, quieter, and far more human. These are the 15 legends who stayed true to themselves, even when they couldn't say it out loud. Number 15. Ramon Novaro. He was the original Latin heartthrob, charming, refined, and every bit the romantic hero audiences adored. Ramon Novaro rose to stardom in the silent era with films like Ben-Hur in 1925, where he captivated audiences with his grace and charisma. But the man Hollywood saw was only half the story. Behind the polished image was someone quietly living a double life. Within studio circles, it was no secret that Novaro preferred the company of men, but the public could never know. MGM executives built a gentlemanly image for him, one that couldn't include honesty. As the decades passed, he became more reclusive, watching as new stars replaced him. Still, he remained dignified, hosting quiet gatherings.
I beg your pardon. I saw you admire this ring, and I thought perhaps you would like to have it.
Staying out of the gossip pages and finding small pockets of peace in his private world. When he passed away in 1968, tabloids revealed what he had kept hidden for decades. But the truth didn't stain his legacy, it deepened it. Novaro had lived through an era that punished authenticity, yet he never allowed shame to define him. His story reminds us that even in silence, courage can speak louder than applause. Number 14. William Haynes. Before Hollywood even had a rule book, William Haynes broke every one of them. He wasn't just one of MGM's biggest stars of the 1920s, he was one of the first to live openly with the man he loved. While the studios built images of macho heroes and dashing playboys, Haynes simply refused to lie. His partner was Jimmy Shields, and the two lived together proudly in an era when such honesty could end careers. Studio head Louis B. Mayer eventually gave Haynes an ultimatum: marry a woman to preserve his leading man image or lose everything. Haynes didn't hesitate, he chose love over fame. Hollywood closed its doors, but the world opened new ones. Haynes and Shields became celebrated interior designers, reinventing themselves and decorating the homes of stars like Joan Crawford and Ronald Reagan. Their partnership lasted nearly 50 years, and friends described their home as the happiest in Hollywood. While others hid behind contracts and staged romances, Haynes built a real life, one of laughter, creativity, and loyalty. The cameras stopped rolling, but he found a better spotlight, one that never required pretending. Number 13. Clifton Webb. Clifton Webb had the sharpest wit in Hollywood and the kind of elegance that made him unforgettable. He stole every scene in Laura in 1944 and The Razor's Edge a year later, always playing characters who were charming, refined, and just a little bit mysterious. Off-screen, that mystery deepened. Webb lived with his mother for much of his life, a relationship that became the subject of endless speculation and gossip. In an industry obsessed with image, Webb never bothered to play the part of a romantic leading man. He never married, never confirmed rumors, and never seemed to care what anyone thought. Friends and biographers later described him as a man completely at ease with himself, witty and unapologetically private. While Hollywood spun tales of grand love affairs, Webb built a quiet life of independence. His co-stars adored him, and his audiences loved him for his intelligence and style. He didn't need to shout his truth, it lived in his confidence and in the effortless grace that defined his every performance. When he passed in 1966, his secret was already an open one to those who mattered. Clifton Webb didn't fight Hollywood's rules. He simply ignored them, and that perhaps was the boldest act of all. Number 12. Charles Laughton. Charles Laughton could become anyone on screen: a pirate, a tyrant, a king. But in real life, he spent decades pretending to be something he wasn't. The British-born actor who gave us Mutiny on the Bounty in 1935 and The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1939 carried a truth he never spoke aloud. Married to actress Elsa Lanchester, Laughton kept his private life carefully guarded. Within creative circles, his orientation was considered an open secret, but the public never knew. His talent was enormous. his presence magnetic, yet he battled the loneliness of living in a world that wouldn't accept him. Elsa once said their marriage was one built on friendship, understanding, and shared creativity. Together, they built a partnership that defied conventions and lasted decades, even as rumors swirled. Laughton's brilliance on stage and screen often reflected the depth of someone who knew what it meant to hide in plain sight. He passed in 1962, admired by his peers and loved by his audiences. His legacy isn't just his performances, it's the quiet strength it took to remain kind, generous, and true in a time that allowed neither honesty nor freedom. Number 11. Raymond Burr. He played the sharpest mind in television, Perry Mason, the man who always had the answers. But in real life, Raymond Burr lived behind a wall of stories. To protect his privacy, he invented an entire fictional life. He told reporters he'd been married more than once, that he had lost a wife in a tragic accident, and that he had a son who passed young. None of it was true. In truth, Burr's lifelong companion was actor and producer Robert Benavides. The two shared a home, built a vineyard, and ran a production company together for more than 3 decades. But to the outside world, they were simply business partners. Burr knew the cost of honesty in the old studio system. It wasn't just your reputation at risk, it was your livelihood. So he crafted a story to protect the real one. He carried that secret until his passing in 1993. Only then did the full truth emerge that the quiet widower Hollywood adored had simply been guarding the love of his life. Raymond Burr's story is a reminder that even lies told for survival can hide a deeper truth. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Number 10. George Cukor. He was the director every actor wanted to work with, and the man the studios couldn't quite figure out. George Cukor shaped some of Hollywood's most iconic films, The Philadelphia Story in 1940 and My Fair Lady in 1964. His movies celebrated wit, elegance, and complicated women, but his own story was one the press never dared to print. Behind the camera, Cukor's Beverly Hills home became legendary. Every weekend, it turned into a sanctuary for actors, writers, and friends who shared the same secret. His gatherings were glamorous but discreet, Hollywood's worst-kept secret and safest refuge. To outsiders, it was just another high society party. To insiders, it was the one place they could finally breathe. The studio bosses didn't care how talented he was. They cared about appearances. He was once fired from Gone with the Wind because producer David O. Selznick thought his style was too refined for a war film. Yet despite the industry's paranoia, Cukor never lashed out or quit. He simply kept working, delivering hit after hit, building a legacy that outlived every rumor. He passed away in 1983, still private, still respected, and still known as the women's director in a town that couldn't admit how much it owed him. George Cukor didn't need to shout his truth. He filmed it through empathy, beauty, and quiet rebellion. Number 9. Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo was the face of rebellion in the 1950s. His role in Rebel Without a Cause alongside James Dean turned him into a teen idol overnight. But while his on-screen image was all energy and emotion, his real life was far lonelier. As the years passed, Hollywood struggled to find roles for him. He wasn't the fresh-faced youth anymore, and whispers about his private life made studios nervous. But Sal was braver than most. He didn't hide behind fake romances or carefully staged photos. Instead, he embraced roles that others refused, complex, honest characters who reflected parts of himself he could never discuss publicly. By the early 1970s, he had started speaking candidly with friends about who he really was. It was a quiet kind of courage, one that came long before the world was ready for it. He was on the edge of a comeback when tragedy struck, cutting short a life that had finally begun to open up. Sal Mineo's legacy isn't just in the films he made, but in the example he left behind, a reminder that being authentic, even in silence, can still change the world around you. His honesty came too soon for his time, but just in time for history to remember him differently. Number 8. Farley Granger. Farley Granger looked like every studio's dream, charming, confident, and effortlessly photogenic. He rose to fame in Alfred Hitchcock's Rope in 1948 and Strangers on a Train in 1951. both of which carried an undercurrent of tension that critics later recognized as deeply personal. Off-screen, Granger lived his life on his own terms, something few of his peers could claim. While Hollywood pushed image after image of false romances, Granger quietly built a long and loving partnership with producer Robert Calhoun. Their relationship lasted decades, though it was never a topic for interviews. The two simply existed together, without apology, without the need for headlines. When Granger published his memoir, he didn't sensationalize anything, he simply told the truth. He had lived, loved, and worked through an era that demanded silence, yet he managed to carve out a peaceful space in the noise. That calm defiance was his real artistry. By the time he passed in 2011, he had lived a full life on both coasts, unashamed and unhidden. Farley Granger proved that you could work in the system without letting it own your soul. For a man once famous for thrillers, his greatest twist was living quietly and authentically all along. Number 7. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift was Hollywood's golden boy, the perfect mix of sensitivity and mystery. He starred in A Place in the Sun in 1951, and From Here to Eternity in 1953, redefining what a leading man could be. But behind his haunting eyes was a man at war with his own image. Clift was known to those close to him as gentle, funny, and deeply thoughtful. He had friendships and relationships with both men and women, but the public only saw the myth. Studios worked hard to sell him as a tragic romantic hero, never letting the truth slip. He lived mostly in New York, away from the Hollywood spotlight, where he could be freer, but never entirely free. After a devastating car crash in 1956, Clift's career began to unravel. The tabloids called his decline the longest self-destruction in film history, missing the point entirely. He wasn't destroyed, he was exhausted by pretending. Still, he kept acting, delivering performances so raw that they made audiences uncomfortable. He never confirmed a thing, but he also never lied. When he passed in 1966, his privacy remained intact. But his story endures as one of quiet rebellion, a man who refused to be molded, even when it cost him everything. Montgomery Clift didn't just act tragedy, he lived through one gracefully and on his own terms. Number 6. Anthony Perkins. To the world, he was Norman Bates, the polite young man from Psycho, in 1960. But Anthony Perkins' real life was its own quiet thriller. Behind the boyish charm and uneasy smile was someone struggling to survive in a system built on secrets. Perkins was part of a generation of stars forced to live double lives. His talent made him invaluable, but his truth made him vulnerable. He followed the Hollywood playbook smile for magazines, take photos with actresses, say nothing personal. Meanwhile, he shared a long and deeply meaningful relationship with fellow actor Tab Hunter, a romance neither could ever publicly acknowledge. Years later, Perkins married photographer Barry Berenson, and the two built a family that balanced love with discretion. Friends said he was thoughtful and kind, but also burdened by fear, the kind that came from years of hiding. When he passed in the early 1990s, he left behind not scandal, but admiration. In a time when honesty meant exile, Perkins still managed to express truth through his art. Norman Bates may have made him a legend, but the real Anthony Perkins was something rarer, a man who kept his heart intact while playing by rules designed to break it. Number 5. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter was the face of the 1950s, sunny, handsome, and perfectly packaged as America's clean-cut heartthrob. He starred in Battle Cry in 1955 and Damn Yankees in 1958, making every studio executive swoon with dollar signs in their eyes. But while his image screamed all-American boy, his real life was far more complicated. Warner Brothers carefully shaped Hunter's career, choosing his roles, his interviews, even his dates. Magazines featured him with actresses like Natalie Wood, creating the illusion of a Hollywood romance that never existed. Behind the flashbulbs, Hunter was quietly in love with actor Anthony Perkins. The two shared a relationship that had to be hidden under layers of studio secrecy. When whispers began, the studio panicked. A false tabloid story nearly destroyed his career, and Hunter was reminded that honesty was not allowed in Hollywood. He played along because he had no choice. But decades later, long after the curtain had fallen, he finally told his own story. In his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, he revealed the truth that the industry had tried to erase, and he did it with grace, humor, and pride. Tab Hunter lived long enough to see himself not as a scandal, but as a survivor. He proved that time has a way of catching up to truth, and when it finally did, it smiled back at him. Number 4. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was Hollywood's idea of perfection, tall, charming, and as romantic as a postcard. From Pillow Talk in 1959 to Giant in 1956, he was the ultimate leading man. But the image was a carefully scripted performance. Behind the glamour was a man quietly living two lives. Hudson's career was built by agents who knew how to shape illusions. His manager arranged a short-lived marriage to secretary Phyllis Gates, meant to silence gossip and keep fan magazines happy. The world saw a clean-cut gentleman, but behind closed doors, he longed for honesty. Friends described him as kind and generous, yet weighed down by the impossible burden of pretending. When his health declined in the early 1980s, Hudson made a choice that would change the world's perception of him forever. He went public with his illness. That act, though forced by circumstance, broke decades of silence in both Hollywood and society. He became one of the first major public figures to bring awareness to an issue that few dared to discuss at the time. Rock Hudson passed in 1985, but he left behind something more powerful than his movies, a legacy of truth. For years, Hollywood had made him a symbol of perfection. In the end, he became something much more real, a symbol of courage. Number 3. Cary Grant. Cary Grant wasn't just a star, he was a myth. Suave, elegant, and endlessly debonair, he was the man every audience adored. From Bringing Up Baby in 1938 to North by Northwest in 1959, his charisma defined a generation. But behind the tuxedos and champagne smiles was a personal story the studios never wanted told. For over a decade, Grant lived with fellow actor Randolph Scott. The two shared a house in Santa Monica, affectionately nicknamed Bachelor Hall. Magazines photographed them cooking, relaxing by the pool, and reading together images that looked more like a family album than a publicity stunt. But the studio system didn't know what to do with that, so to quiet speculation, they arranged marriages and public romances, all to preserve Grant's carefully constructed image. In interviews, Grant always kept his answers playful. When asked directly about the rumors, he once said, "Everyone says I am, and I suppose I am, but I don't really know." That line alone made Hollywood nervous. It was the closest thing to honesty he ever offered. Grant married 5 times, yet none of those relationships ever lasted. The only constant, many said, was his bond with Scott. Whether their relationship was romantic or simply deep companionship, it stood as one of the most enduring partnerships in an industry built on pretense. Cary Grant never explained himself, and maybe that's why his mystery still feels timeless. Number 2. James Dean. Few names evoke Hollywood's mythology like James Dean. He made only 3 films east of Eden in 1955, Rebel Without a Cause in the same year, and Giant released posthumously in 1956, but his impact has never faded. To fans, he was the symbol of restless youth. To those who knew him, he was something even more complex. Dean's private life was full of contradictions. He dated women publicly, but his closest relationships were with men. Fellow actors spoke of his emotional intensity, of friendships that often blurred into something deeper. He lived fast, but his restlessness wasn't just rebellion, it was a search for belonging in a world that didn't know what to do with someone like him. Rumors tied him to several fellow stars, including Marlon Brando, who reportedly kept him at arm's length. One writer described their connection as a friendship that felt like obsession. When asked once about his preferences, Dean famously said, "I am not limited to one way of living." It was a rare flash of honesty in a world allergic to truth. He passed at just 24, leaving behind questions that would never be answered. Yet his short life continues to inspire those who saw in him not just a rebel, but a human being brave enough to live without clear boundaries. James Dean didn't belong to Hollywood's rules. He broke them simply by being himself. Number 1. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando didn't just change acting, he changed what it meant to be a man on screen. With A Streetcar Named Desire in 1951 and The Godfather in 1972, he became a symbol of raw power and rebellion. But Brando's true rebellion wasn't in his performances. It was in his refusal to be defined by anyone, in any way. He never hid behind labels. He lived freely, cared deeply, and loved without categories. Friends, co-stars, and even biographers later revealed that Brando had relationships with both men and women throughout his life. He once told a reporter, "Like a lot of men, I've had experiences, and I'm not ashamed." It was the kind of honesty most stars of his generation wouldn't dare to voice. Brando's personal life was as unpredictable as his performances. He was intense, philosophical, sometimes distant, but always unapologetically himself. He viewed identity as fluid, art as reflection, and emotion as truth. For him, love wasn't something to explain, it was something to experience. When he passed in the early 2000s, the world remembered him for his craft, his defiance, and his contradictions. But in many ways, that was the point. Marlon Brando was never trying to be perfect. He was trying to be real. And in Hollywood, that's still the bravest role of all. Old Hollywood built legends out of illusion, but these 15 stars built theirs out of survival. They lived in a world that forced silence, yet somehow left echoes that still speak today. Their strength wasn't in the roles they played, but in the truths they carried quietly, courageously, and alone. So now it's your turn. Whose story surprised you most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden chapters of film history.